Hey, today is National Clean Out Your Refrigerator Day. Okay? It's Clean Out Your Refrigerator Day. So maybe you're out there cleaning out your refrigerator? I don't know. Today is also the Great Smokeout. I should point that out as well. And knock on wood, basically, I no longer smoke either. So maybe you're doing that. And if you're doing that today, you're not having a good day. I can tell you right now, quitting smoking is not easy. So let's do something fun, right? Because the Daily Dope is in the air. Howdy, gang. Yes, I'm Jeff McAleer, back as your host here at The Daily Dope, presented by thegaminggang.com. So I've kind of messed around with the mic a little bit. Somebody had commented, like a jerk, on one of the videos, speaking to the mic. Well, the mic is right off the frame, and I do speak into it. But the thing is, I tend to move around. Sometimes I lean down to pick something up over here. So, I don't know. Yeah, everybody is such a complainer these days. It's like, geez. So I have moved the mic a little bit, which unfortunately now we're seeing the pop filter here. But, we'll leave it as it is for today. See how the sound comes out. Because I don't want to be yelling into the microphone, because I think that would suck. So I just want to speak at a normal volume, right? So anyway, I happen to be Jeff McAleer. I'm the Grand Poobah of thegaminggang.com. So welcome aboard. This is your first time tuning in. This is a very, very casual show. I just talk about mainly tabletop gaming, do some unboxings, do some reviews. Today, I am actually going to be reviewing the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Yes, I know it has been out since about 2014, but I've never done a video review for it. So we're going to kind of page through it. I'm going to share some thoughts about Dungeons & Dragons overall, my experience in the past with D&D. So it's not just going to be, oh yes, look at this page. Oh yes, look at this page. So a little bit different. Anyway, today is November 15th. So today and tomorrow are the final episodes that are going to stream in the afternoon. Beginning on the 19th, I will start streaming in the evenings at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. I also want to mention that for the first time, I actually posted with YouTube community. So I don't know. I don't know. I honestly didn't even realize it was there. So usually I'm kind of tweeting stuff about what's cooking, what's on the show, what's coming up. I guess I'll actually try to actually share that with subscribers on YouTube too, huh? Anyway, because this is a live stream, do want to point out that chat is available. It's not on screen. It's one of the ways I kind of keep some of the stranger commenters at bay. But I do keep an eye on the chat. So if you are watching live, you want to say hello, just chime in, or maybe there's something about the Dungeon Master's Guide you want to get a closer look at or have a question about, by all means, chime in and I will respond. So today is also episode 198 of the Daily Dope. Monday is going to be 200, episode 200. Sweet. All right, so I'm going to dive into the news. Not a bunch of news, just a little bit of news today. But I do want to point out, if you are not a fan of the tabletop gaming news here on the Daily Dope, check the show notes. There's time code right there. You can jump right ahead, skip right past the news. But speaking of the news, Renegade Game Studios has revealed plans for a historically based political game that is set for a spring release. And I've got the dope on Revolution of 1828. It is 1828, and the time for elections has come around again in this newly formed democracy we call the United States of America. John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson are the candidates vying for the people's votes. For the first time in history, this grand campaign is also fought on the pages of newspapers and the eager public audience. This was an election that found its way into history books with its yet unseen ruthlessness and malevolence. This was America's first smear campaign. In this two-player game, you're trying to become the next president of the United States. To reach this lofty goal, each player will try to take election tiles that suit your best and hinder your opponent's campaign. Election tiles allow you to garner the allegiance of electors and use the power of smear campaigns to skew the populace in your favor. If you also use the powerful campaign actions to your advantage and have the press look the other way, nothing should stand in your way. Gain the most votes by the end of the game and start your work as America's 7th president. Revolution of 1828 is for 2 players, ages 12 and up, plays in around 30 to 60 minutes, and will carry an MSRP of $30 when it arrives in April of 2019. Sounds interesting. It really does sound interesting. And I have heard stories about this campaign and just how nasty it was. If I remember right, didn't Andrew Jackson say John Quincy Adams' wife was like a whore? Had been a prostitute or something. I mean, it was very, very bizarre, if I remember right. But yeah, I guess what's old is new again, eh? One thing I am kind of curious about is, why are they calling it Revolution of 1828? It's not really a revolution, it's an election. Maybe the depths that people sunk to get elected was revolutionary at the time. But I'm not sure why they're calling it Revolution of 1828. But should be pretty interesting. So today's Thursday. I always like to talk about RPGs and take looks at RPGs on Thursday. So I have some RPG news, and Free League is going to be releasing the highly anticipated Forbidden Lands role-playing game next month, and I've got the dope. Brave adventurer, did you hear the story of the Forbidden Lands? Beyond the mountains, beyond the mists to the north, a rumor has been spreading that you may soon enter the cursed world of Forbidden Lands. Now it has been confirmed. Free League Publishing has announced that the upcoming fantasy RPG Forbidden Lands launches on December 6th. The blood mist has begun to lift, the curse that had been sucking the life out of anyone who dared stray too far from their hearth. Now treasure hunters and scoundrels will soon begin to enter the lands. Do you dare travel into the unknown unbound by any fate or story set for you? Will you hunt for ancient treasures? Fight whomever gets in your way and build a new world for yourself on the ruins of the old? Will you be the one of the raiders of the Forbidden Lands? Prepare to make your mark on a cursed world. Will you survive long enough to tell the tale? The tabletop RPG Forbidden Lands is a brand new take on classic fantasy role-playing. This open world allows you to freely explore the dangerous realm and venture into the unknown, while still taking part in the epic campaign to decide the fate of the cursed lands. Forbidden Lands is a legacy game in which your actions will permanently change the game map, turning it into a living chronicle of your adventures. Doesn't that normally happen in role-playing games, though? The unique rules for exploration, survival, base building, and campaign in Forbidden Lands can easily be ported to any other game world. Forbidden Lands was named one of the most anticipated RPGs of 2018 by N-World. The crowdfunding campaign raised over $250,000 and was the 3rd most successful RPG Kickstarter in the world for 2017. There is a trailer video for Forbidden Lands from Free League, so let's take a look.
Did you hear the story of the Forbidden Land? Beyond the mountains, beyond the mists of the north? Once it was called the Raven Land, our promised land. These days, strange creatures haunt those valleys, beasts that should not be, for the land is cursed. Once Zygofer the Spellbinder was one of us, leading the passage through the mountains. But when faced by the savage orcs, he opened dark gates to seek the help of demons. That was his undoing. Zygofer turned on us and placed himself on the throne of the Ravenland, his daughter, Terenia, by his side. To keep their vile corruption from spreading, our king built a great wall across the mountain pass and forbade all to ever speak of what had happened. Since that day, the Spellbinder's domain is known as the Forbidden Land. It is said that the Demon King and his daughter still rule there, terrorizing the human folks who still live north of the wall. Yet, not all is lost, for in the Forbidden Land, there are those who defy the Demon King and his daughter. Adventurers, treasure hunters, scoundrels, not heroes, far from it, but men and women who dare travel the land as they like and make their own mark on it, unbound by any fate or story set for them. They hunt for ancient treasures. They fight whomever get in their way. They build a new world for themselves on the ruins of old. They are the raiders of the Forbidden Land.
Forbidden Lands will be available on December 6th, and the box set, yes, it is going to come as a box set, does carry an MSRP of $49.99. Now, I have seen that from some retailers online for quite a bit less than the $49.99, although they are not showing that this will be available for them until January of next year. So I am not positive who's going to have Forbidden Lands on the 6th of December and who will not. Because, of course, Free League is a Swedish company, and they've had some really, really cool stuff. Tales from the Loop, as an example. There's also Mutant Year Zero, which, of course, I have covered both of those titles. Very, very cool. I am going to see a review copy of Forbidden Lands, so of course I am going to share that with you as well. So I will have that on a future show, maybe hopefully before December 6th when it comes out. All right, my final news piece is role-playing game related in a way, because there is a documentary that's up for crowdfunding on Kickstarter. Today is the last day. There's only a handful of hours left, and it is The Dreams in Gary's Basement, a documentary on Gary Gygax, and I've got the dope. Gary Gygax was one of the great minds of the 20th century. His innovations have influenced generations of artists and spawned tens of billions of dollars in global revenue. With Dungeons & Dragons, Gary crafted a vehicle for engaging the mind at a creative, analytical, social, and even emotional level, all at the same time. There is truly nothing else like it. Gary's work has woven itself into the fabric of our culture, yet there is no monument to recognize him, not even in his own hometown. We intend this project to be a filmic monument of sorts, a high-quality, emotionally engaging record of Gary's story that can be appreciated by gamers and non-gamers alike for generations to come. As a lifelong player of D&D, I feel this project has been a dream come true. I've met so many of my idols, met so many friends, and developed a deeper understanding of Gary Gygax and his magical game. This movie has been 3 years in the making and is now just months from being completed. We have dozens of interviews and hours of other great footage, and in a rough cut, it already tells a compelling story. Nice. With your support, we can bring it across the finish line by giving the movie high-end color grading, sound mixing, and additional archival photos and video. We have a talented post-production team in place and ready to work as soon as we fund. Please help us bring Gary's inspiring story to life and create a lasting addition to his legacy. And that comes from Pat Kilbane, the director. So it's about a 3.5-minute video. I am really impressed by what they've got already. So let's take a quick look at the Dreams in Gary's Basement from Kickstarter. Hey, why didn't the video kick in? Hey, come on.
My father was a shoe repairman by trade. He didn't go down a traditional path. We were very poor at that time, and then he creates this innovative game. I think he knew he had something.
Gary Gygax loved all kinds of games, and he had a feel for what made a game that was fun to play.
I mean, he did look like a wizard.
He had a facility with numbers.
A great man, a creative visionary.
You couldn't talk to the guy for 5 minutes without getting pumped up.
Welcome to 330 Center Street. This is Gary Gygax's house.
So he's living in Lake Geneva. He had 5 kids at that point. Then he lost his job.
They were really living close to the edge.
At the same time, he was banging away on a third-hand typewriter, writing what would eventually become Dungeons & Dragons.
This is a substantial breakthrough in intellectual history.
All of a sudden, you found a credible way to make fantasy real.
It's story time, it's playtime with friends.
It's deep play. You consciously, collectively agree to enter into an imaginal world.
It's wild.
Oh shit, this game isn't half bad.
This is a word-of-mouth phenomenon that spread like a meme before the internet.
People were comparing it to heroin because they just couldn't believe how obsessed people became.
With that came the controversy of allegations of Satanism.
That was terribly threatening to the dominant culture.
This game affects the most intelligent of our children. It's white versus black witchcraft.
There was this menace of, is some freak gonna try to get to Gary?
There was the disappearance of James Damascene Bird.
There's no such thing as bad publicity. Make it forbidden and everybody wants it.
1976, it's 300,000. 1977, it's 700,000.
The sales tripled one year and tripled the next year.
And now I've got a pile of money and I'm going to Beverly Hills. I'm going to have fun.
Gary has an amazing mansion,
A Rolex watch and a matching ring.
he's making cartoons, he's having parties,
And I walk by the jacuzzi and they're like 2 Playboy bunnies bubbling around in it.
he's living the dream.
Gary ultimately came to understand that he had a problem.
You were in danger of losing Dungeons & Dragons itself.
Grudges certainly were produced.
Real lives got affected and real people got hurt.
Sometimes lightning strikes, but lightning is a wild element.
This is not a man who has an MBA and 20 years of business experience. This is a man who started it in his basement.
The stairs are very narrow and they're quite treacherous.
There are only a handful of hours left to support the Kickstarter as it will end tonight. I believe you got about 7, 8 hours left right now. In fact, when I finish doing the show, the first thing I'm going to do is go pop a news piece up about the Dreams in Gary's Basement. Now, I do have to point out, I'm sharing the Kickstarter web address because it is, this is being created by, what is it? Dorks of Yore, I want to say it's called. But there's absolutely no website whatsoever. There's a Twitter, there's Facebook. Of course, there's a huge long Kickstarter link as well that wouldn't fit on this, right? So I put Kickstarter.com. If you are interested, definitely check out the news piece that I will have up within probably a half hour of me finishing the show today. So, of course, that's if you catch the show today. But I do want to point out that you can pledge your support starting at $20 to receive a digital download of the documentary, or you can get a Blu-ray with plenty of extras for a $50 pledge. This is well past its funding goal. In fact, when I took a look, it was about $3,000 shy of its final stretch goal, which is like at $100,000. So they may have already hit it by now. Cool thing about this is the expected delivery is April of next year, because they already have all the interviews. They've got all the lot of footage. This is something I would be super interested in checking out, because I have pointed out in the past that I really enjoyed the book Master of Imagination. I can't, off the top of my head, I cannot recall the author's name, but I really, really enjoyed it. Really liked it, except for some liberties that were taken. Like what Gygax was thinking at certain points in time. Like one of them is, well, like he was on his deathbed, right? And I was kind of like, I don't know about that. I don't know. If this is supposed to be nonfiction, you shouldn't be putting yourself in somebody's shoes on their deathbed saying, oh, this is what they were thinking about when the Grim Reaper is standing there going, yeah, okay, let's go, right? But anyway, outside of that, I thought it was excellent. I thought it was really, really good. So this is definitely a documentary I would be super interested in checking out. And it's kind of interesting, too, because they show those really shitty dice that used to come in the box sets, you know, that really garbage dice. And then they show Gary Gygax's house in Lake Geneva, which, if you don't live in the Midwest, kind of looks kind of strange. But those of us who live in the Midwest are like, oh, yeah. They're like just neighborhood houses you'd see, right? Just like a, you know, kind of like a, I don't want to say too flat, but there's like kind of 2 levels to it, and a basement, stuff like that. So very, very cool. I'm looking forward to this. So, because it's funded, it will be coming out. Anyway, so kind of funny how that's like my last news piece today, and we are talking Dungeons and Dragons again, right? So this is kind of a WotC week here, because we had, yesterday I did my review of Axis and Allies and Zombies. On Tuesday's show, I took a first look at Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Today I'm reviewing the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Tomorrow, I might as well talk about what's on future shows, right? Future episodes here. So tomorrow's show, I'm going to take a first look at the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. And I will kind of discuss a little bit why we're seeing Ravnica as kind of a setting book as opposed to other well-known Dungeons & Dragons settings. So just going to share some thoughts about that. We're going to take a look into this. Then on Monday's show, it will be the last of the Wizards of the Coast titles for a little bit. I am going to review Betrayal Legacy. I am planning on getting a couple more adventures in this weekend so I can do a full review. I'm going to try to keep it as spoiler-free as I can, but I'll be doing a full review of that, and that will be on Monday's show. Tuesday's show, changing things up a little bit because of Thanksgiving. So we got Thanksgiving. So usually on Wednesdays I do war games, but I'm not going to do a war game next Wednesday. But on Tuesday, I'm going to unbox and take a first look at Marvel Codenames, which I have been interested in checking this out. This is probably something that my brother Greg and, of course, Cameron would probably dig playing. Then on Wednesday's show, as I mentioned, I'm changing up for 1 week. I'm not doing a war game on Wednesday, but I'm going to review Cryptid from Osprey Games, who Osprey Publishing is well known for a lot of their wargaming stuff, and history books. So I am going to review Cryptid because I've been holding off on that for a little bit. So that is what's coming up on future episodes of The Daily Dope. And of course, got to remind you once again that on Monday, the show will be moving to 7 p.m. Central Time in the evenings. So I'm sure people are, checking out the video because they want to hear my thoughts on the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. It's designed by Jeremy Crawford, Mike Merles, Peter Lee, Chris Perkins, Robert J. Schwalb, Rodney Thompson, and James Wyatt, with loads and loads of artists as well. The 320-page book was released back in 2014, and it does carry an MSRP of $49.95. I have seen it as low as about $27 brand spanking new. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on over to the other camera here. There we go. So like I did with the last, on Monday when I paged through the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I kind of elevated the book a little bit to kind of cut down on some of the glare that we had, that normally if I just lay it flat down, that will come up. So a couple of things I want to talk about as far as D&D, right? So I happen to like 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I do not play a lot of D&D. I'll be the first to point that out. I have cannibalized, different adventures, modules over the years for other game systems. I'm doing it right now, actually, with Cameron and his friends for his fantasy campaign that I'm doing. But of course, I was involved playing 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. We played a little basic D&D. I was a player for that. I was not a dungeon master for that. And a lot of people give Wizards of the Coast and the team behind Dungeons & Dragons a lot of grief. And I think, I'm going to pop on my reading specs, I think, honestly, it's really uncalled for, because I don't think a lot of people realize that Wizards of the Coast, of course, people know Wizards of the Coast is a subsidiary, I guess we will say, of Hasbro. And of course, Dungeons & Dragons is one of the brands that Wizards of the Coast oversees. Well, the thing is, Hasbro, if you just take Wizards of the Coast, look at Wizards of the Coast and the profits that Hasbro makes just from Wizards of the Coast, it is minuscule. I know a lot of people out there think, wow, Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering and even some of the Avalon Hill stuff, it's like, wow, that must bring in loads and loads of money for Hasbro. In the great scheme of things, yes, it does bring in a good chunk of cash, but when you look at what percentage it is of the profits of Hasbro, it's like 1%, less than 1%, last time I had actually looked into it. So then you take a look at Dungeons & Dragons, as far as the profits that D&D brings in for Wizards of the Coast compared to Magic the Gathering, and it's not close. Magic the Gathering is the big money maker for Wizards of the Coast. D&D is profitable, but it is not the kind of money maker that people think it is. In fact, before 5th edition came out, there was talk that Hasbro was going to just wrap up Dungeons & Dragons, that there would not be a tabletop game any longer of Dungeons & Dragons. This was floated out there. But considering that Hasbro looks at all of their properties outside of just what they are, right? So with D&D, we're talking about games, video games, movies, cartoons, all that kind of stuff. Hasbro decided, hey, you know what? It's probably a good idea for us to keep producing Dungeons & Dragons as a tabletop game. That being said, one of the reasons why we don't see tons of releases from Wizards of the Coast is because there isn't a huge budget that is allocated to D&D. The budget that's allocated to Dungeons & Dragons compared to Magic the Gathering is night and day. And that is why we don't see tons and tons of releases for Dungeons & Dragons every year. Usually we'll see a couple of adventures, we might see a source book or two come out, but it's not like Paizo, right? It's not like Pathfinder, where Pathfinder we find tons and tons of releases, multiple releases every month. In fact, personally now, I don't know this for a fact, personally, I really do think that Paizo, of course, because Pathfinder is such a huge part of their success, the budget that Paizo allocates to Pathfinder probably blows away the budget that is allocated to Dungeons & Dragons on a yearly basis from Wizards of the Coast. So with what the creators have to work with, and I know, people are like, oh, I hate Chris Perkins' stuff. I hate Mike Burrell's stuff. With what they've got to work with, I think they have done very, very nicely with 5th edition and everything. As far as the core books, I think the core books are great. I know I'm kind of giving that away. I did have issues with some of the first adventures that were coming out. Horde of the Dragon Queen, in my written review, I said, it should have been titled Board of the Dragon Queen, because in my opinion, it was really by the numbers. It actually reminded me more of a Call of Cthulhu adventure than anything else. Just another one of these, go find these pieces of something so it can be put together. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. But I have to say, the adventures and everything have gotten much, much better. So anyway, let's jump into the Dungeon Master's Guide here. So one of the nice things I like about the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide is, first of all, right here, it's talking about a world of your own. So the Dungeon Master's Guide actually starts off more looking at like the big picture right here, the big picture, right? It's more talking about, okay, so let's talk about kind of the game world. It's basically make it your own, right? So, I mean, the default game world is Forgotten Realms, but you're not locked into that. If you want to do Greyhawk, if you want to do Mysteria, if you want to do Planescape, I mean, granted, you don't have a lot of source material for 5th edition as far as doing that, but you can. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see Dark Suns in the very near future, but that's just my opinion, my guess. I think we would see that before we would see like Planescape. But one of the things I like is that it's kind of the whole attitude of 5th edition is sort of, do with it what you will, as opposed to, oh yeah, well, it's got to be this, got to be this, got to be this. And I know some people were upset about that. Some people do not like the fact where it's a little more open-ended than what some gamers would like. Now, myself personally, I enjoy kind of just kit bashing my own stuff. I talk about it all the time. I talk about how I've never seen a role-playing game that I think is perfect. Never. There's always something that I'm, pulling out, throwing something else in from a different game. So, talking about kind of creating your own world, different gods, different religions. Talking about different settlements, mapping your campaign. I'm a person that, I'm a game master who believes that you really do have to have some sort of maps, even if you're not busting out, cartography and things like that. Even if you just have you start off with a blank piece of paper and you're just kind of drawing lines to different places, kind of jotting down some notes on what's there. I think creating your own, because as I pointed out, if people watch the show quite a bit, I've been playing around a lot with Dungeon World. So, and that's one of the kind of things Dungeon World is basically, don't sit there and have like a whole game world created. You're creating it with your players at the same time. So, of course, D&D's not like that. D&D doesn't have, D&D puts more work in the hands of the Dungeon Master, I should say. It's talking about different cities, different settlements, discussing magic in your world. You could, if you want to play something that's low magic or, low fantasy, as some people would consider it, you can do that. You can create restrictions on magic, different schools of magic. Talking about creating your campaign. Great point here. Start small. I can't tell you how many times over the years, and of course this is more when, I was a teenager in my, early 20s and things like that. I would have some grand idea for a campaign and I would just have, oh wow, it's like, this is going to be just all this stuff going on. And then when I came down to like actually piecing it all together, it'd be like, wow. So I got the big grand finale in my head, but how do I get there? I would have a little more difficulty with. So talking about setting the stage, you're going to find tons and tons of different charts, different random charts, throughout the book, I've never been a huge random encounter fan or random chart fan. But one thing that I think is kind of cool is you don't necessarily have to roll a die. Take a look at the different options, the different results in these random tables to kind of give you some inspiration. So for an example, what I like to do as far as with like random encounters, right? I'm not going to roll dice for a random encounter, but I will actually pick out a few encounters from that random encounter chart and kind of flesh them out. If not on paper, at least have them fleshed out in my head. It's tracking time. That was a big thing with Gary Gygax. That is for sure. So I know a lot of people, I kind of believe this too. I think you can't really do a campaign justice without taking, some time out. I guess it sounds stupid to say this, but taking time out to be able to track time, because if you're not tracking time, then it's very difficult for you to have big consequences for things going on. It's pretty tough to pull that off. I'm gonna move this mic a little bit, see if get a little closer in. All right, so talking about different play style. I mean, some people are, very action-oriented. People, are like, oh man, they love to roll dice. I think that's kind of a problem with some role-playing game systems, or at least some game masters in role-playing game systems. I think they're too in love with rolling dice sometimes. I think rollitis is a real problem. But it's talking about hack and slash. Hack and slash, it's kind of like Monty Hallism back in the day. I've talked about that before. Doing something where it's more about the storytelling, doing something in between. So as I mentioned, a big focus of 5th edition is for people to make the game their own. Talking about tiers of play, local heroes, heroes of the realms, flavors of fantasy, heroic fantasy, sword and sorcery, epic fantasy, mythic fantasy. I happen to be a big fan of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories from Fritz Leiber. So that's kind of how I sort of do a lot of my fantasy campaigns over the years, where, I mean, there's magic, but it's not everybody knows magic. So we've got that. Dark fantasy, intrigue, swashbuckling, wuxia, crossing the streams, creating your multiverse. So this is where we start getting into different planes. And I have never been one that got into all this kind of stuff, various different planes of existence and things like that in my fantasy games. I think about the only thing I've actually ever really done much of was when running Call of Cthulhu. Once in a while, I would do some stuff involving the Dreamlands, but that's about it. But I mean, one thing that's kind of cool about having the different planes, different planal travel, I guess we would say, and of course, this is however you want to actually create your own campaigns, is that you can always kind of have each plane have their own kind of play style for the game. So if you want something to be like more hack and slash, you can do something like that. Now that's not necessarily how they how the designers lay it out here, but because they're talking about like the Feywild and different inner planes and things like that, the Abyss, the Nine Hells. That's been around in D&D for a long time. Other planes. We got Master of Adventure. So now we get into a segment which is more about the Dungeon Master running the game. So some people might think I'm crazy for saying this, but I personally think 5th edition is probably more OSR than a lot of OSR role-playing games out there. And of course, once again, it's all going to depend on how you define that, right? So, I mean, some people call it old school revival. Some people call it old school renaissance. I have actually heard somebody recently talking about they were calling it old school. Forget. But it was completely different, right? Now, that was something I had never heard before. But the way I look at it, an OSR game happens to be where a lot of the focus is on the action, a lot of the focus is on the dungeon delving, but also a lot of the focus is that you don't have tons and tons of rules to cover every little thing. I know I should joke about grappling again, but I won't. I will not give in to my temptation. But to me, old school Renaissance, old school revival games focus a lot on the combat. We've got, there's specific rules for combat and magic and healing and things like that, but there aren't like tons and tons of rules as far as like skills and things like that. And I honestly believe that 5th edition has kind of gone back to that feel. Right, so we start talking about creating adventures. So we're starting to dive down a little more. So the book opened up where it was kind of like, the grand scale of things, your world, different planes, things like that. Now we start kind of doing a little more of a deeper dive, kind of focusing more on the personal aspects of the game. Get a kick out of it. That's the Hut of Baba Yaga, I do believe. So talking about elements of a great adventure, published adventures, adventure structure, dungeon goals, wilderness goals. Once again, we got some of these random charts. Like I said, my opinion, like read through these, get an idea of what inspires you, what kind of gets your juices flowing, as opposed to, oh yeah, I'm rolling a 12-sided die. Oh, well, that's what came up. All right. It's got event-based adventures. Talking about key locations, framing events, side quest, encounters, XP thresholds by character level. That was always something that I was never a huge fan as far as Dungeons and Dragons and in many other role-playing games that use the experience, where it's like, okay, well, you go from, first level, oh, now I've got enough experience where I'm suddenly, boom, suddenly I've completely reinvented myself with new skills. I always thought that was kind of bizarre. But, it is what it is, right? I mean, it's carried over to umpteen different computer games as well, and console games. So, random encounters. I already talked about how I'm not a huge fan of random encounters. There you go, nice owl bear. I like the art. I had noticed that the artwork, in my opinion, the artwork lately has gotten to be a bit more realistic than some of the artwork that we saw in some of the earlier Dungeons and Dragons releases. Hey, is that Xanathar? Could be. So you're talking about different NPCs, NPC party members. That used to be a huge thing with D&D that after the first edition, maybe second edition, it kind of got away from, was having hirelings, having, henchmen and hirelings as part of your party. But then again, back in the day, see a lot of adventures for D&D, like, first edition D&D, and it's like, oh, this adventure is for 6 to 10 characters, level 4 to 6, and it's like, really? Could you imagine 10 people sitting around a table playing D&D? Because I certainly can't. Not even back in the day. I think the most we ever had in a game we were actually, either myself or my friends were running of any role-playing game, is I think we may have had 6 a couple of times, but that's about it. Talking about different villains, creating your villains, environments for your adventures, mapping a dungeon. I also have to say, and I've said this time and time again, I am not someone who is real big on flip mats and using miniatures and things like that in my role-playing games. It's just not for me, right? I'm more theater of the mind kind of game master, as opposed to, well, I need to know exactly how many feet away from XYZ your character happens to be. All right, so talking about wilderness here. Creating settlements. There are some cool rules. I know I'm getting off track here and talking about something else. There are some pretty cool rules about creating steadings, is what Dungeon World calls them. Basically cities and towns, villages, things like that. Pretty interesting stuff. Random encounters at sea. Traps. This is a cool section here because talks about traps, creating traps in Plague. Traps have been like one of the most popular things about Dungeons and Dragons for a long time. Just ask Grimtooth. And one of the cool things here is they give you some example traps, but they also kind of talk about how do you design your own traps. So I thought that was pretty sweet. Then we got Between Adventures. This is another aspect that a lot of times in Dungeons and Dragons, I think, at least back when I was a kid, I think really got kind of the short end of the stick is what goes on between your adventures, right? So I'm not saying that you have to role play out, the 2 weeks between, missions or whatever you happen to be doing. But a lot of times it would just be like, okay, so you finish up one adventure and then the next time you guys get together, it's like, boom, off on something else. So there are some rules here about, as far as what's going on between your adventures, how you're spending your treasure that you've earned. One thing that's different about 5th edition than some past editions is past editions had a lot of times you would have characters who'd be just, stashing away all their gold in that so they could buy magic items. You'd have magic items that were available in different shops, and you would have a percentage chance of, certain kind of items being available, in the smallest village you walked into. And let me double check something here. Yeah, we're pretty good today. No drop frames. Sweet. We were having that drop frames problem for the past couple of shows. It was really weird. But I was going to say, you don't have that anymore. You don't have it where it's like, oh, well, I've been saving up all my gold pieces so I could go get that magical armor. Nope. But here, it's kind of cool because it's sort of like, hey, what can you do in your downtime? Well, you can invest in businesses. You can create magic items. So here we even have, a section talking about creating downtime activities. Got treasure. A lot of this book is devoted to treasure and magic items. So dungeon masters out there who are really into that kind of stuff. And I mean, come on, let's be honest. I think we're all kind of into that stuff, right? We may not necessarily fill up our dungeons and our adventures with some, like, every cool magic item or piece of treasure there is, but I know I've always liked checking them out, reading them over, and being like, yeah, I like that, but nah, I don't want to be the guy who hands out all the good stuff all at one time. So we got the types of treasure, talking about random treasure, magic items. We're gonna have a lot of different charts throughout here, different categories, wearing and wielding items, minor properties, magic item table A, B, C, D, and E. So if you're creating like a treasure hoard, and just more and more. I do like how we get some artwork of some of the various different items as well. I think that's kind of cool. The apparatus of Qualish. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's kind of funny because in the Neverwinter online game, I have one of these that I travel around in. I haven't played that in a while. I really have to boot that up. I was playing it a lot, and then I stopped playing about a month ago. So, because now I'm at that level 70 where it's like a lot of grinding, and I'm not a big fan of grinding. All right, so different kind of armor there. Boots of elven kind. Berserker axe. Cape of the Mountebank. So, very, very nice. But like I said, you're going to see, I want to say it's maybe 100 pages devoted to treasure and magic. So, the Deck of Many Things. I do believe this is the Deck of Many Things, right? Yeah, it's a Deck of Many Things. Demon armor. Hey, we're Stormbringer. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just a kidding. I could have swore, if I remember right, there's an adventure, a really old adventure. I think I want to say it's, first edition, and the magic sword that's in it is like a complete ripoff of Stormbringer or Mournblade from Michael Moorcock's Elric series. Flame Tongue. Did we see a Vorpal sword? I wasn't even paying attention as I flipped through. I thought there's a Vorpal sword. Maybe I'm wrong. But I like this. I think this is very, very cool, as it's got all this. I mean, now some people are probably like, dude, man, they should have had just a treasure book. I don't need all this information about treasures and that, because I tend to buy pre-constructed adventures and stuff, and all that information's already in the books. And I would understand that, but you know, good dungeon masters, good game masters, they try their hand at creating new stuff as well. Or even if they take something that's a published adventure, just kind of tearing it apart and rebuilding it in their own image, how they want it to play out. So as we keep going through, look at all this goodies. All of this goodies could be yours if you're playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Rod of Resurrection. Okay, so, whoops. Oh, well, better be reviving her, I'm going to take a guess. Not looking too good. Okay, so let's keep moving along here, because the next section's pretty cool too. All right, artifacts. Once again, kind of just lots and lots of info as far as, there we go, Master of Rules. So I was getting to this section here because one thing that I really like about this is not only does it talk about running the game, it also gives you a lot of different options to make the game your own, right? Which I know some people don't like about 5th edition, that it's a little too open-ended. It's a little too open to your own interpretations. Whereas, you know, earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons would be, okay, you know, there's only one way to resolve this sort of conflict, this sort of action, things like that. Whereas in 5th edition, it really is garnered towards, you know, kind of doing your own thing if you want. So we've got a section here talking about, you know, running the game. I mean, the reality is, as far as 5th edition, it's almost always, well, no, I shouldn't say almost always, it's a lot of rolling 20-sided dice and then utilizing some of the other dice as far as, you know, damage or randomized stuff like, you know, how many of an item or how many hit points you heal. Another aspect I know some people don't dig about 5th edition is it's a little tougher to kill player characters than it had been in the past. I know some people don't like the fact that the characters can regain all of their hit points after a long rest. You know, to me, that doesn't really bother me that much. But once again, with 5th edition, if you don't like that, you can change it. You can change it up however you want. You don't want to make it where it's like, you know, Call of Cthulhu, where it's like, oh, well, you only have 16 hit points, and that means you're a pretty buff person. You must have a pretty high constitution. And it takes you weeks to get all your hit points back. So talking about objects having hit points, sizes of creatures, so showing it here. Then, of course, if you're using squares or if you're using hexes, there's even some info if you really want to use D&D more as like miniatures. In fact, it's right down here. Talking about flanking, different kinds of cover. Talking about right here using miniatures. Like I said, to me, I mean, and I love miniatures, don't get me wrong, and I used to paint a lot of miniatures, and I keep really wanting to kind of reach out to some companies about maybe showing off some of their miniatures and maybe even doing some videos about painting miniatures. But I just, not in a role-playing game. It's just, I don't know. I tend, at least from my experience, I tend to have found that the players that I would have would tend to kind of zone out a little bit and start focusing on just on their mini, as opposed to, you know, buying into the whole experience of what's going on in the game. Just like it drives me nuts when and this is more like when we're playing like board games and that, right away I can tell there's going to be a problem if one of the players just starts, let's say you've got like meeples or dice or whatever, they start just like fidgeting with their dice or with their meeples constantly. It's like, okay, we are not playing Texas Hold'em here, and these aren't chips that you're messing with. So I usually can tell if somebody starts doing that they're kind of zoning out on the game, that their head's not completely in it. And that was kind of my experience with miniatures as well, even though I love them. I love playing miniatures games. So, different stuff like diseases, poisons, madness. It's space madness. Talking about experience points, absent characters. That was always something that, especially with Call of Cthulhu, I used to run into, which a lot of times it would be Elliot Miller, my best friend, Elliot over at voiceofe.com, and his nephew Paul, and our friend Ed Ruprecht. Ed used to always have to kind of like leave earlier. So, because back in the day when we were in high school, like summer vacation, we played tons of games. I mean, that's like what we spent most of our time doing. And he had to be home early, so we'd be in the middle of a session of Call of Cthulhu, and he had to go. So we would drop him off, pick up some food, come back, and of course, Elliot and Paul would be like, "Oh, come on, man, just run a little more, run a little more." And I'd always have to come up with something to be like, "Okay, so why isn't Ed's character with them or taking part in what's going on when he was right there, earlier in the adventure?" So anyway, so then we get into the workshop. Talking about different adventuring options. This is another thing I think is kind of cool too, as we start getting into various different options that you can utilize. If you like it for your game, by all means, knock yourself out. If you don't like it in your game, by all means, don't bother using it. Just like we've got firearms. We've got alien technology. Then we talk about plot points, which I think is pretty cool. Because a lot of this is talking about, throughout the book mainly, not this section here, how you tie these things all together, how you make the adventure when you're creating it, or even if you're running some stuff, because there are pre-published adventures that are just, cool set pieces, but they don't gel as, just an overall experience, right? They just don't make a whole lot of sense. So there's a lot of that throughout the game book here, talking about how to tie things together. Action options, a bunch of different stuff. Then we got creating monsters, which is pretty cool because it's actually not as difficult as you would think. One thing that's kind of a letdown in the Dungeon Master's Guide is that creating spells is kind of weak in my opinion. But you got to keep in mind, there's only 320 pages, and I know 320 pages, you're like, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of pages. But when we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons and how much there has been published over the years and how many different angles you can take on fantasy role-playing, 320 pages really isn't a lot. So, of course, with all that stuff to cover, some things are going to kind of get a little bit of the short shift on it. All right, so talking about monster features. There we go, creating a spell. And it's kind of funny because it's sort of like, well, when you're creating a spell, you should kind of base it on a spell that's already been created. Which is sort of like, well, okay, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? Different new character options. Modifying classes. Vary using spell points rather than spell slots. Talking about background. And then we get random dungeons, which I swear, now I gotta admit, I have not seen every Dungeon Master guide that's ever been released, but I could swear that in the first Dungeon Master's Guide for Advanced D&D, there was an appendix that was like random dungeons, and it was kind of like you could actually create, I swear, I'm almost positive, because I never did that. I never created just random stuff to play in, but I swear, I think Elliot did. I think Elliot would roll stuff up and play like solitaire based on the various different random things he would roll up. So kind of cool. So anything that sometimes can make dungeon masters' lives easier, I'm all for. But once again, like I said, I'm just not necessarily. To me, a lot of random stuff just ends up making the whole adventure pretty random, or your campaign pretty random. All right, so that's how we're going to kind of pretty much finish up the book with the different appendixes. We've got the different monsters by environment, which I like. I think that's pretty cool. Now, of course, it's not going to include every single monster that's out there right now, because there are new monsters that have been created, or at least, statted out for D&D since the Dungeon Master's Guide came out. Then we got by challenge rating, which when I was talking about the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I was talking about how I haven't really started reading it. We just paged through it, right, on Tuesday. Thing I kind of was curious is how do the different levels tie together? Is it going to just be like really, really standalone kind of stuff? Or is there going to be some sort of like thread that runs through all of this? So I'm hoping that's the case, because a lot of times I know, especially when some role-playing games where it's sort of like, oh, well, as your characters get better, you no longer can utilize certain creatures anymore, right? So for an example, once characters get to, like, let's say 4th, 5th level, it'd be like, well, I'm not going to use goblins anymore. So you'd be, Game Master would be sitting there going, okay, so what the hell can I throw at him? All right. And they would have to, like, kind of base their adventures they were creating on just random, not random, but just by looking through these different charts based on, like, their hit dice and stuff like that. Whereas the way that 5th edition is kind of set up is more along the lines of that, even little, challenge rating 1 monsters in that, in enough numbers, are still extremely deadly to your characters, even when they're, of higher levels. So I do like how that's kind of a focus too. Then we got different maps, just kind of giving you an idea of different maps too. I do dig the cartography that I've seen in the various releases. Although Dungeon of the Mad Mage looked like it was kind of going back to a little more standard stuff. I like when they sometimes throw some 3D stuff in. I always think that's pretty cool. Then we've got some inspirational reading for Dungeon Masters. Now this is for Dungeon Masters. This is not necessarily, this isn't, oh, well, where's Michael Moorcock in here? Where's Tolkien in here? No, this is Dungeon Master inspiration. Because I want to say the last section of the Player's Guide is inspirational reading for everybody, right? Jack Vance and Fritz Leiber and all that stuff. So, all right, and there we go, 320 pages. So that is, I've been using this to kind of hold the book up. Don't worry, we're gonna take a look at this soon. I was hoping to try to shoot a video for this over the weekend, but I don't want to devote an entire show to doing an unboxing of this. It's just a small card expansion for The Lost Expedition, which is an excellent game. So anyway, so that is the Dungeon Master's Guide. What do I think? I dig it. I like it. I've said it before. I have no qualms about saying that I really do like 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I'm almost completely ignorant about 2nd edition D&D because by that time, I wasn't playing Dungeons & Dragons anymore, and none of my friends were running it either. 3rd edition, I saw a little bit of. 3.5, I saw a little bit of. 4th edition, I did check out the core books, and kind of didn't like the move towards everything being very tactical. To me, that was like, hey, if I'm going to do that kind of stuff, I'll run a miniatures game, right? I'll play a miniatures game, create a campaign for, fantasy miniatures. I like 5th edition because I think 5th edition pulls some classic stuff from, way back in the day and utilizes that very well. I also like the fact that it is more open to interpretation than past editions. You know, nobody's sitting here going, oh, okay, well, we've got the RPGA and we've got this tournament module that, you know, everybody's going to play in as a contest. So everybody had to run the game the same exact way, right? Everybody had to know the same rules. So I like how that's changed. I like where the focus is more on storytelling. I think the Dungeon Master's Guide is great. You know, even at nearly a $50 MSRP, I still think it's a very good pickup for being able to pick it up for about $25 brand new through various different avenues. I think it's a steal. I still think for the money, role-playing games in general provide the most bang for their buck, because the reality is you could buy core books for an RPG and never have to buy anything again. If you're creative, if you got a lot of imagination, all the tools are right there in your hands. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I most definitely give the Dungeon Master's Guide actually a 9.1, which is a smidgen higher than the Player's Handbook. I do feel that, you know, there should have been some more page space devoted to creating spells. There are a few items that I through areas like I love the treasure and I love the magic items and all that stuff. I don't think we needed all like 100 and some pages of all that stuff. So that's why I ding it a little bit, but I still think it is an excellent book. And on a scale of 1 to 10, the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide is certainly a 9.1. Should want to point out more D&D tomorrow. I am going to be paging through and taking a first look at the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica and talking a little bit about why Wizards of the Coast is focusing on Ravnica as opposed to a multitude of other settings that have been covered in D&D that people are really like, oh man, I want this for Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, but as I like to say, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, comics, movies, TV. Come on, by now you know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. And tomorrow is Friday. I will be back. So until then, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Thanks again for watching The Daily Dope, presented by The Gaming Gang. If you like this episode, be sure to give it a quick thumbs up. And if you dig the channel, please subscribe. If you'd like to check out our previous episode, click right here. And if you want to check out a somewhat randomly selected episode, give a click right down here. It'll be like opening a box of Cracker Jacks. You just don't know what you'll get. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'm Jeff McAleer.